Hey everyone, Silver here, and today we're doing something a little different. 4 short Pokemon Creepypastas for your listening pleasure. I felt that these stories were too short for their own dedicated video, but it'd be unfair not to narrate them all. So I decided that this is how we're going to do this instead. So without much further ado, grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy the stories. Infection by Pasta is Creepy. Today was a day I'd waited for since I knew what Pokemon were. The little creatures you fight in order to win, and they enjoy it. I love little things, and today, I was getting one. I jumped off my bed, not even getting proper clothes, and almost bolted out of the door. But of course, before I could, my mother came. "Oh, look at you, in such a rush." I looked at my mum, embarrassed. "You need to get dressed if you're getting a Pokemon today," she said, throwing my clothes at me. I ran into my room, then changing. I then started to bolt out of the door, and she threw me my backpack. "Thanks, Mum," I yelled while putting it on. She said something back, but by the time she said it, I was too far away to hear her. Professor Oak's laboratory was only a mile from here. I lived in Pewter City, so it was no problem getting there. Once I arrived, I saw Professor Oak and someone else. I went up and said hello. "I'm here to get my Pokemon and begin my adventure." Oak stopped talking to the boy and looked at me. "Oh, it's you, Marvel." I stared at him and nodded. He then pointed to the 3 Pokemon on the desk. "Please, help yourself to one of these 3. He handed me a Pokédex so I could examine what Pokemon were inside. The Pokédex identified the 3 as Charmander, the Fire type, Squirtle, the Water type, and Bulbasaur, the Grass type. I didn't have any idea which to choose, but after looking at their stats, I chose Squirtle. The boy next to me looked at me. "Seriously? You're going with the turtle?" He looked at me like I changed colors. "Yeah, why not? He has the best stats." He gazed upon the desk and chose Bulbasaur. Without saying a word, he walked out. "Who was that?" I asked Oak. "Oh, that was Terrence. He's more of a grumpy kid. He was literally asking if I had any better Pokemon to choose from." I looked at Oak and shook my head. I then turned around and left. Despite my strange encounter with Terrence, I was still so happy to get moving. I started back towards Pewter City and was going to fight Brock. Once I arrived, instead of seeing the happy trainers in the gym ready to fight me, I found a giant hole. I didn't want to go in, so I left the gym and went back to my house to ask my mum what happened. I walked in the house and called out, "Mum?" She walked out. What is it, hon?" "Do you know what happened at the gym?" She stared at me intently. "What?" We ran outside into the gym, seeing that hole again. "Oh no," she said. "It's here." I stared at her, about to ask what, but then something came out of the ground. My mother yelled at me to get into the house. She was following for a little, until I heard a scream, and she wasn't there. After it took her, it was distracted and I lost it. Instead of going to the house, I ran to Professor Oak's lab, telling him that we have to stop this. "Oh no! This is awful," he said, staring at the Pokeballs. "I'm sorry, but I must use you, Pokemon." He grabbed it and threw it at the beast who just arrived, yelling, "Go, match up!" After this Pokemon was sent out, I was sure we'd be able to stop it, but before the Pokemon could move, it was what seemed like poisoned, and almost killed instantly. "This is madness," Oak said, staring at me. "We have no option. We knew this day would come, just not so soon. It is here from underneath." "What is here?" I yelled at him. And in our final dying moments, he yelled at me, The infection. Lonely Green by Pasta is creepy. Life was normal. I was doing what I always do, playing video games and searching through old ones until I found what I wanted. I didn't remember having it, but I found my old copy of Pokemon Green. I figured it must be worth a lot on eBay, so I decided to sell it. While searching, I managed to find my red, blue and yellow as well. All the original games were here. I figured that I'd make a lot more if I sold them together. I wanted to go back through though, and play each game. It took me a while, but I'd beaten yellow and blue. What was left was green and red. I took green and went to play it, forgetting that it was actually Japanese. I then turned it off. I couldn't understand it, so I forgot about it. I put in my old red cartridge, and once again I started. My name was red as default. I then made my rival green. My options were very limited, like Gary, Blue, Green, Lucas. Since Green was the lost game, I named him that. The game was mostly normal up until the Elite Four. Once I got there, Green came up and spoke to me. He started saying, "Why don't you like me? Just because I was from the lost game? Doesn't mean you have to turn me off. Here's the deal. If I win this battle, you put Green in. If you win, it's your choice." I was pretty certain that I would win, so I took him on. But to my surprise, all of his Pokemon were level 83 or above. I was crushed. So I did what was loyal. I put in Green, and what I saw there was crazy. There were tons of posters on the walls. I read them and they were actually in English. Things like, "Why do they hate me?" and "I'm so alone" were written on the walls. I didn't quite understand why. I turned it off and came to the conclusion that this game must have been a bootleg. That night though, I had a dream about Pokemon Green, and how alone he might just be. When I awoke, I popped the cartridge of Green in and got into it. His sprite was dead, and all there was a note that you could click on. The note exactly read, "Dear player, I'm sorry I was a disappointment to you. And I think I'll just go now. I'm sure your life will be better without me anyway." I had concluded that he had committed suicide. I sold the game that day, and I still wondered why I ever bought it in the first place. But to this day, I wonder, how alone is Green? Gallows by Endays. Gallows. Places the evil met their end. No doubt to be morose, sad little places. The sleepy little town of Thieraville had gallows. Not that anyone minded. They had their last hanging years ago. And there was a historical note to them, so the residents didn't essentially care to reconstruct them. Pokemon trainers tended to avoid them though. Did the young and elderly revere it alike? Fear it? Was it that their Pokemon avoided it like the plague? Hell if I know, and I grew up here. I bet you want to know who I am. I'm Cypress. I own a Mismagius. I got it from the kind man in Thieraville. Fun. He said to care for it, rambling about how the gallows were not what they once were. The gallows, however, made it so that even though Thiera's my roots, I'm not there anymore. I was on a walk to the forest with my Mismagius, Maggie. Maggie was always able to resist the repellent of the gallows, the only Pokemon in town that could. Tonight was different. Tonight, someone else was at the gallows. A lithe, pale, ethereal woman stood before the gallows. She was wasp-waisted, elegant, and dressed in a white, angelic dress. Her hair was fine and dark brunette. She seemed so delicate, so elvinically beautiful. She was like a flower. Perhaps. She turned, and I went silent with shock. In her arms, she clutched an Absol tightly. It wasn't horribly disfigured, but it was dead. Not a mark was upon it. "I've made a bad mistake," she said. "I've made a bad mistake," she repeated, grinning widely. Maggie cried out in terror. Her face was then split by a grin with all too many teeth, perfectly aligned and white. "I've made a bad mistake." She started laughing. Maggie hid behind me. Then, inexplicably, I approached her. I ripped her off her feet and threw her to the ground, hoping she'd shatter. What vile act had she committed? I didn't want to know. She fell with a crack, and Maggie stared coldly at her. I'm in a different city now. I felt an immense drive to leave after that. Something happened to me. But of all questions posed, one stands out. Why did the man who gave me Maggie pass away that very night? The Washed Cartridge by Pasta is creepy. Today was a day like none other. I found my Pokemon Pearl cartridge. I had been searching for it forever, and I finally found it. Sadly though, it was washed out, and I didn't know it was Pokemon Pearl until I was forced to play it. Honestly, I regret every moment of playing it. When I got onto it, the title screen music was a little distorted, but I found this normal for a washed out cartridge. When I got into the gameplay was a bit choppy, but again normal. I looked at my old team, still all normal Pokemon, but they were all named in a sentence form. Get out before they get you. I was a little creeped out by this, but I ignored it. I was too happy. I played on, and a loud thud came through the speakers of the DS. I was also a bit creeped out by this. I have a habit of checking signs, and one of them that I checked said this: "Check your Pokemon." I then did, and they were now named. Why did you not listen to Andrew? I was beginning to wonder what was going on, and my lack of awareness changed to watching everything around me. I then proceeded to check the summary. Yuck. My Infernape's eye was missing, a leg gone and its flame out. The rest of them were the same as Infernape. Every one of them, distorted and zombie-like. I wanted to play through this, even though I was terrified. I looked around for ages, walking, but no one was here. I was then suddenly teleported to a place. The box at the top said "No Hope," as if it were the name of the place. It was a forest, filled with trainers, but they were all pale and zombie-like too. And instead of standing still, every time I would move, they would move one step closer. That's why it was so large. Eventually it got to a point where if I moved, I would be smashed by two trainers. I was. Suddenly a text box came up, illustrating a scream. My character's face popped up on the screen, and it too was zombified. I was spawned in a place named Lost World, and it was black as far as the eye could see. Darkness. I couldn't walk back or sideways. So, I went forward. I checked my Pokemon this time, and they were all Magikarp, named Dead. I followed the path until suddenly the game froze. I was about to pop out of it, when I pressed X and the menu popped up. My Pokemon were now named No More Movement, Only Death Comes. I chuckled at this a little bit. After all, you don't die in Pokemon. Ash blacked out, it said. I knew I'd be teleported to a Pokemon Center, but I wasn't. Instead, it stayed there and said, "It's over." Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed the story. We're at the end of this one, but there are plenty more you might not have heard yet. So here are some options: my entire Pokepasta playlist, or a story that YouTube thinks you'll like from me. With all that said, I hope you leave a like, maybe a comment, and if you want to hear more, subscribe and notifications to get latest stories as soon as they're available.